1025. That's the current number of Pokémon in the franchise, and almost all of them have had multiple sprites throughout Pokémon history. Under that premise, it's only natural that they hide tons of curious details and secrets, which is exactly what motivated me to bring you this video. This is the first in a series of 3 videos exploring errors, strange changes, and general curiosities about Pokémon sprites. I hope you enjoy them, and before we begin, I'll make the usual bet. Since Pokémon curiosities are one of the most overcovered topics by PokeTubers and it's hard to find new ones, if you discover at least 10 things in this video that you didn't know, you have to subscribe to the channel. Deal? And what better way to start than with one of the most controversial sprites in Pokémon history? Just to get it out of the way, I'm talking about the Pokémon that marked the first ever Paldea reference in the entire saga, Registeel. So what exactly is the issue? Well, let's just say it's asking for a taxi a little too enthusiastically. Because of this, that sprite is exclusive to the Japanese versions of Pokémon Diamond and Pearl and was changed for the international releases. This is Kadabra's sprite from the Japanese red and green versions, and there are 2 odd things about it. First, in this sprite, it clearly has 4 fingers, while in every other sprite it only has 3. And as if that weren't enough, it's also throwing up the classic rock hand sign. Quick clarification: whenever I say red and green during the video, I'm referring exclusively to the Japanese versions, since green was only released in Japan. Now let's talk about Mew, a Pokémon that clearly wasn't having its best moment in this generation. Apparently, having the DNA of every Pokémon was starting to take its toll. We now jump to Pokémon Stadium, where we can see a rather strange substitute sprite that clearly doesn't match the current model. The Japanese fisherman sprite in the Japanese versions of Pokémon Gold, Silver, and Crystal appears smoking, which is already unusual, but his description even specifies that he's a smoking fisherman. It seems that in Japan, the idea of fishermen smoking is some kind of cliche. Don't ask me, I'm just a guy. And we continue with NPC sprite curiosities, and everything I'm about to mention refers to the Japanese versions. Still in Generation 2, the girl sprite was altered between the Japanese and international versions. In the Japanese version, the sprite looks like she's winking, and apparently that was a bit too much for the international kids. On top of that, this sprite originally wore a miniskirt, which was also changed between versions. Additionally, the beauty trainer sprite in Generation 1 matches the one used for swimmers. You can see it here. Smeargle in Gold, Silver, and Crystal had a red tail, while its shiny form had a green one. However, starting with Pokémon Stadium 2, the regular Smeargle's tail became green, and the shinies turned red. Mantine in the 2nd and 3rd generation games appeared in its sprite alongside a Remoraid. However, when you caught it, you only obtained Mantine as you'd expect. This was corrected in later generations, where Remoraid was removed from the sprite. Kakana's sprite in Pokémon Red and Blue appears to have arms, something never seen again. Gligar changes color from blue to purple over the generations. Another curious sprite is Koffing's in Pokémon Red and Blue, where it had its iconic skull floating above its head, something that was never repeated. And speaking of skulls, doesn't Marowak's skull look suspiciously similar to Alakazam? Could it be that when Cubone grows up, it leaves behind its mother's skull and instead uses an Alakazam skull? Instead of overthinking it, we might even consider that Cubone once belonged to the Alakazam evolutionary line, since both final evolutions use objects in their hands. And speaking of Abra, there's only one sprite where you can see it with its eyes open, specifically in Pokémon Gold. And continuing with open eyes, it's actually rare to see Snorlax like this. It only happens in Pokémon Stadium. Also, about Snorlax, Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire are the only games where Snorlax doesn't have its characteristic fangs sticking out of its mouth. In these same games, the Sage Trainer sprite in the original Japanese versions appeared praying, a symbol that was removed in the international releases. Something similar happened with the Channeler sprite. In the Japanese versions, she held a rosary, but this was removed in the international editions. Whoever was making corrections at Game Freak clearly wasn't too fond of religious symbolism. Bulbasaur originally had the same color for both its bulb and its body. Over the generations, however, those colors became more differentiated. You might think this was due to the limited color palette of Generation 1, but that explanation doesn't quite hold up when you look at Venusaur, which already featured multiple colors. Another detail about Venusaur is that over time its flower changed from pink to red. Arbok in the early Pokémon editions looked almost grilled, with strange black markings on its back. These marks were completely removed in later generations. Additionally, the pattern on Arbok's chest changed several times. There's also a curiosity regarding its shiny form. It used to be gray but later became yellow. It seems Game Freak has a thing with gray shinies, since Sandshrew also used to be gray before turning into that odd yellowish-green color. At least the gray had some charm. Another poison-type curiosity appears with Golbat. In Generation 1, it's the only time its tongue is visibly shown. And speaking of gray shinies, Charizard was previously gray as well, before eventually becoming black. Diglett is suspicious. And now for one you all probably know. Pikachu has been getting progressively thinner over the years, ever since it invested in NFTs. And regarding Pikachu's belly, we can also see in these sprites that its yellowish circular belly pattern was replaced with a completely flat tone over time. In Pokemon Red and Blue, Nidoking had its back spikes arranged in an alternating pattern. In later sprites, this changed to a straight line of spikes. The exact same detail also occurred with Nidoqueen. Meganium's flower, in the second generation games, originally had only 5 petals. This changed in later generations, and even the petal pattern itself was altered. The spikes on Lapras's shell have varied in both number and size throughout the generations. Here are some examples. And honestly, riding a Lapras with that many spikes must be pretty uncomfortable, right? Ghastly in Generation 1 didn't seem to have a visible body, or at least it wasn't clearly defined. This is Among Us, and this is its form. However, that changes in later games. Take a look. Sudowoodo in Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal seems to be suggesting something. Machoke in Generation 1 had a crest that extended down its back, which was later modified in subsequent generations. Raichu's shiny and normal color schemes were swapped during the transition from Game Boy Color to Game Boy Advance. Electrode in Pokemon Red and Blue appears to have a strange circle on its head, something that never shows up again. Interestingly, its Hisuian form does have a small opening on its head. Could this be a reference to the original sprite? I choose to believe it is. And speaking of electric types, something odd happens with Magnemite in Generation 5. The colors of its magnets are swapped compared to other generations. I guess all the Magnemite in that region must be a bit quirky. Finally, Exeggcute in Pokemon Red and Blue had one noticeably larger egg in the middle, something that never appears again in later generations, where all the eggs are roughly the same size. Slowpoke in Pokemon Silver had a white belly in Japan, while in Europe it did not. However, that trait can still be seen in other sprites of this Pokemon. More belly-related changes appear with Dratini in Generation 1, where it had a ringed belly pattern that later disappeared. And now we see that Haunter experienced something similar to Kadabra. In some sprites from the first and third generations, it clearly has 4 fingers. In more modern entries, however, it only has 3. Could this be a side effect of evolving through trading? Or maybe it lost a bet to Mr. Mime, since in Generation 1, Mr. Mime only had 4 fingers, but later gained a 5th. Lickitung in Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow appeared to have a forked tongue, a feature that also disappeared over time. And don't worry, yes, Vaporeon. I'm not going there. The point is that in Generation 1 and in the Japanese versions, it seemed to have a sort of mohawk-like detail that was later removed. Pinsir also differs between the Japanese and international versions of Pokemon Gold and Silver. In the international releases, it has a slight black line down its back, like you might expect from a real beetle. In those same version differences, Lantern lost a small yellow circle near its eyes in the international versions. Something similar happened with Politoed, though in its case the missing yellow spot was on its back. If I had to choose, I'd rather lose a small yellow dot than what Flaffy lost, because in the American versions, this Pokemon has noticeably less wool. And we're not done yet. Ipom also lost the color on its belly. I guess traveling abroad comes with side effects, losing fingers, belly spots, or even a fin, as happened to Wooper, whose missing fin never returned. In the USA versions, they always seem to remove something. Maybe that's just one of the downsides of capitalism. Though of course, I do need capitalism to survive myself. So if you enjoyed the video and discovered a bunch of new sprite curiosities, I kindly ask you to subscribe to the channel. I upload only once a week, and I always try to bring something new. If I missed any sprite curiosities, feel free to leave them in the comments.